to Getting It,
the conversation where we try to understand life just that little bit more.
my name's Dan.
And my name is Saban.
We're both medical students based in London.
And in today's episode, we talk about the benefits of reading, choosing the right book, and how to make the most of the reading process. So Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, thank you. I'm quite busy at the moment, but overall I'm not doing too badly, actually. How about you, Saban?
Not too bad. I guess I'm busy without the necessity of being busy, but
Yeah, it's always good to be that way because you're kind of in control of the busyness.
yeah.
You've got the power. So yeah, I guess we're both fairly busy, but at the same time, summer holidays, so kind of got the chance to enjoy ourselves a bit. And I was just wondering what you're up to right at this very moment.
At this very moment, I was speaking into a microphone, but I've been reading a lot.
Oh,
So, yeah, I've really tried to up my reading game this summer, and then just try and to read a lot more last academic year, but that just kind of fell through the floor.
have you always been a reader? Like, have you always read to an extent through the year? And
Not books. So I'd read a lot, but not books. So it'd be articles, like blogs, forums, newsletters, but never really read books. I don't know if... So I guess I'd consume a lot of stuff. You can't really count YouTube as reading, but I guess it's still almost... It's got the same kind of perception as reading where you're...
it's data, information consumption.
Exactly, yeah. So I read a lot in that sense, but in terms of actual books, not really. I'd bought books and I kind of had them on my shelf, but I don't know, I just always found it impractical because it's like I'd want to read whilst I'm like traveling or like, commuting or whatever. But like I didn't want to carry like a fat book in my bag either, and I have to hold it and stuff. And then I don't want to ruin the book, so I want to put it in my bag properly. I don't want to crease the pages. So it was just impractical for me to read books. But then the notion of reading on like an electronic reader, like, a Kindle basically, I was like, it's not the same as reading a nice physical book, holding the book, feeling the book, smelling the book kind of thing.
A lot of people I speak to, I think that's a big barrier to going to the electronic reading. Like, that's actually, it seems to be a very, like the main reason is just it almost goes against the beauty of reading in itself. Like, you haven't got a book in your hands.
Yeah, and you won't have that nice big shelf of books and like perfectly organized in genres or topics or whatever. But yeah, I have now started reading on a Kindle, like religiously, basically just... Yeah, don't have books. I still have those books, but I actually bought some of those books again on Kindle to read again properly, just because there's so much more like benefit through it, at least in terms of like my workflow of reading. One is like on my iPad or phone or Kindle device. I plan on actually buying one later, but yeah, it's just there. So at any time, if I'm just sat for a bit, I can just start reading. I don't usually like doing it like that. I like just sitting down for a set period of time and reading, but there's no hassle of like bringing your book around. If I'm like at uni or on the tube and I want to read, it's not like, oh man, I forgot to bring the book. It's just always with me. Even if I forgot my iPad, then it's like, it's on my phone. And and then from there, it's like, you can obviously change all the fonts and stuff on there just so it's easier for you to read. So, it can help with your own reading speed. I think I still read like significantly faster on paper. I think most people do, but it's pretty close, especially if you have the actual Kindle, then it's like almost paper-like. In terms of the visual experience. And but the main thing is the highlighting.
Yeah, making notes.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes when I'm reading, like I'll just highlight a section. Usually I'll just leave it highlighted, but I have like an abbreviation system because when you highlight something, it automatically pops up with the like take a note thing. So I have like I use a hashtag system. So like hashtag F for further reading, hashtag P for like profound or practical like example or something, hashtag E for example, hashtag I for interesting. So, and then after that, you can like export them all into, onto your computer, into whatever note-taking app or whatever. And because it's all the highlights are hashtagged, is basically organized, right? I can just control F through certain hashtags or like hashtag Q for quotes. So I can bring up all the quotes within a certain book on that page. So yeah, and then obviously then I can, actually make my physical notes by just searching through the different types afterwards. And, yeah, another thing that I've been doing recently as well is sometimes when I highlight, instead of actually writing down, sometimes there's something on my mind that like I have in terms of my own interpretation about that thing I just highlighted. And I don't want to save it for later because I might forget it because it might relate to some other context that was earlier on in the book. So I'll just, instead of typing it out, which on an iPad, I just don't like typing on an iPad. I just voice record it and it just text to speech to text. And yeah, it's actually been quite a game changer in terms of how much I actually retain from a book and how much I can use that book afterwards.
I think so. I use a Kindle as well when I'm in London. I put it in my coat pocket, in my inner coat pocket. It's very useful because for me, the main time that I read in London, or at least this year, was on the tube. So I would have to do a half an hour tube journey every day, and to get to uni or to get to hospital, and I would just whip out the Kindle and read it during the journey, and it's just so incredibly useful. And I think what you sort of mentioned with the being able to highlight stuff, making a note of stuff, and also being able to define things, because it's got the sort of X-ray feature, you know. So if it mentions a certain battle in a historical event or something, or a certain historical figure, you can just hold on that word and it will come up with the definition and stuff. It's just so useful compared to a normal book, like a real book, when, yeah, you don't have that luxury. But at the same time, this summer I've been reading physical books again, and there is a beauty to that too. So I think you don't necessarily have to entirely commit to one or the other. You know, you can just kind of, I don't know, go halfway. And if you're reading a book where you think, I don't know, you'll make more use of it being on the Kindle. Yeah, that's what I kind of do. I go half and half, sort of. And yeah, but it brings me on to a question that I've been meaning to ask you, which is how you select the books that you're reading. So, for example, what are you reading right now, and why did you choose that book?
So, yeah, what am I reading right now? So I'm reading 2 books right now. Yeah, usually I don't read 2 books in one go. Usually I just read one and then go on to the other. But just because these 2 topics were so insanely different that I was just like, okay, fine, I'll read them. So the first book that I'm reading is The Big Fat Surprise by Nina T. Coles, which is a nutrition-based book. And like, you know, health policy, that kind of stuff. And then the other one is The 12 Rules of Life by Jordan Peterson, which is, yeah, he's an interesting figure. So in the end, I was like, you know, I'll see what he has to say in his book, which probably gets a lot of his viewpoints and stuff.
He's a bit controversial, isn't he, in some ways?
Yeah. I guess when people start going against or somewhat attacking, in like inverted commas, the status quo, then you automatically become a controversial figure. I guess most people would say that my kind of beliefs and stuff in nutrition and health and stuff is probably controversial just because it goes against the status quo. But yeah, there are some things he says that I agree with, some that I disagree with, some that I just don't have enough knowledge to kind of make a proper interpretation on. So I just kind of stay as neutral as possible until I feel like I have enough information to kind of formulate an idea for myself about the certain thing at hand.
So why did you choose those books in particular? Did you plan it before, or did it get recommended to you? How do you normally choose a book to read?
So usually it's been recommended through something, because, okay, so at least for like, say, the nutrition aspect or that kind of stuff, usually when I'm reading a book, they end up referring up like this book, like, you know, for further reading on this, like read this. And I'd been following Nina T. Coles for a while, and it was just basically a matter of time until I was going to read her book. It's been on the list for a while. I just kind of had to make my way there. So that's kind of how it came around. I usually like to go off recommendations, or at least I'll see a recommendation, or someone will give me a recommendation, and then I'll go and like look at ratings, the like say stats of an author, or like their credentials basically, and just general reviews and stuff on Goodreads. So yeah, that's probably my process behind it. With the 12 Rules of Life by Jordan Peterson, that was just kind of came out of nowhere. For some reason, like the YouTube algorithm just started like chucking loads of Jordan Peterson like interviews and videos and lectures at me, and I was just like watching whilst I'm like eating and stuff, and I was like, it's you know, mildly interesting, and then started going into it more, like just started watching more, because obviously when you start watching a certain topic, you'll just start flooding your feed with it. And I just started watching more, and then like I said, there were some things I agreed with, some that I didn't agree with, and I thought we just had quite an interesting take on a lot of those kind of contemporary issues that we have today. So I thought I'd just give his book a read, because in the end, I'm sure you're going to kind of go on to this, is like the cost of a book and to read it is almost trivial in terms of how much you can potentially gain from it. Even if you don't gain anything from it, the chance of you actually gaining a lot from a book is quite high. And I'm not sure, do you want to expand on that kind of aspect? Because I know we've spoken about this before.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I only started properly actively reading books about a year and a half ago. It was the start of 2019, because I challenged myself to read 10 books that year, which isn't very many, but I am usually quite busy, and I have a few things that I'm up to normally. So I don't have many afternoons where I can just sit down and sort of read for a few hours. But yeah, I thought this would give me the biggest chance to commit. the time that I mainly read is on transport. So if I'm traveling between London and Bournemouth, that's a couple of hours where I can get through a few chapters of a book, or on the tube, as I said, and yeah, sometimes on a bus or whatever. But it became really important for me to think about what elements I'm considering in choosing the book, which is kind of what you were alluding to as well. And I think for me, the most important things are, first of all, the author, because again, this is something we've spoken about. In reading a book, it's a privilege. Like you're giving someone an absolute privilege of being able to talk to you without stopping. It's a one-way conversation for hours and hours, and you're just exploring someone's mind, I suppose. And it's incredible that you can do that. It's not just with people who are alive, but you can do that with people who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago. And you're seeing into their minds. It's amazing. And I think in choosing the right author, that's just incredibly important. So before reading a book, I will read about the person's age, the person's background, the person's education, the person's belief systems, controversies, anything like that. And just because I don't agree with them as a person doesn't mean I won't read the book. It just helps me understand where that perspective comes from, in a sense. So yeah, that's the most important thing. Like for me, knowing the author. When the book came out, is it still relevant now? The reviews, of course, how it's been received. Although I guess controversial books sometimes will not have they won't be 5-star books a lot of the time.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'll factor that in. And then the last thing for me is the length of the book, because I'm not an incredibly fast reader. I'd say I'm probably around average. And it's a massive commitment. So I try and read books which are slightly shorter, just because, then I can get through more. Obviously, it's like a big formula of, will I read this book? I plug in those things and it comes out.
Wait, hang on. I wonder, like, if you could actually make a spreadsheet like that.
You
actually
probably could. Yeah, times like author score.
Yeah, you can put different
review.
like weightings on. Yeah, like say you weight the author rating more in terms of your research on them, and then overall rating on like certain, like, Amazon or whatever.
And it depends on the type of book, right? So the books that I've been trying to read in the last year, I try and go one non-fiction, one fiction, one sort of like. Sorry, I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. We'll change back in a moment. Do you mind if I go a couple minutes
go
forward?
ahead.
I'm really excited about this bit of the conversation. So, I also thought, in the next, say you read 10 books a year, that means you are sort of consistently reading a moderate amount, right? If you read 10 a year, that in a decade, that's 100 books. That's not that many books. How many books out there are there that you would like? There are hundreds and hundreds of books that you'd really like to read. You have to be so careful in what you choose to read, because you're not going to be able to read all the books you want to in your life. So how can you know? It's a huge commitment. You start reading, this is going to be hours and hours and hours of reading time. Depends how fast a reader you are, but yeah, you have to know that it's going to be worth it for you. So beforehand, I really, really research. I'm not the sort of person who will go into a bookstore, see a book that they think would be cool, pick it up and then start reading it, which is perfectly fine, but it's just not what I do. I try and understand beforehand, as I said, about the author, what other people think of the book, what am I going to gain from this book? Will it be worth my time? And I think there's equal weight and importance for fiction and non-fiction. You can get a huge amount from an old Russian classic, in the same way that you can get a huge amount from a modern professor who's writing something in a field that he's an expert in. So yeah, okay, I've ranted enough here, but choosing the book is really important.
Yeah, and the notion you were getting at with, like, it's basically like having a one-way conversation from someone's mind, like deep within their mind. I never really thought about it that way, and it's true. Like, the amount of knowledge you can gain from a book is unbelievable. Like, okay, you might not get it from every single book, but even if you take one, somewhat profound thing from a book, or something that can improve your life in just a tiny bit, that's like, a pretty good bargain for, a couple, depending on the size of the book, a few hours of reading. Considering the fact that they probably, how long do you think it probably takes for someone to write a book? Like, okay.
Some books, years, right?
Yeah.
A decade.
Yeah. So like, some of the best books in certain, topics or genres or whatever, the person's probably been studying in that field or been an expert in that field for like probably at least 20 years or something. So that's 20 years to write the book ish. It depends on what kind of book and genre. Say if it's a more scientific thing, then that's probably the case where, been studying 20 years and then writing for another 5 years. Okay, let's just say 25 years in total for all of that information in that book to just be compiled into one place. It's 25 years. if you can read it in like 10 hours, like
it's insane.
Yeah,
it's insane. The amount of time it takes to write a book versus how much time it takes to read a book. You're taking in so much knowledge. And yeah, okay, the 10 years is a bit extreme for how long it takes to write most books. I'm guessing most books probably take to actually physically write a few months, maybe a year or two.
Yeah.
But even so, as you said, you're taking it from an expert in a field who's been learning about that thing for 20, 30, 40 years. So it's a massive privilege. And if you're taking on, I know someone at uni who reads about 2 or 3 books a week. That's scary. They're taking on decades of knowledge from incredibly intelligent people every week. Someone who writes and publishes a book is generally going to be a pretty smart person. You're taking on years and years of knowledge in that time. That's almost scary. It's incredible. The amount that you can get from books is scary. And I think that's why choosing the right books is so important. And not just choosing books that you agree with. You know, you have to read books from perspectives that you don't agree with as well. That's the beauty of the information that we have.
Yeah, that's one thing. So it's like, yeah, it's important to choose the book to make sure that you choose a book that you feel like you can gain something from it, like you can apply to some aspect of your life. But then, you know, we always have that natural kind of confirmation bias where we choose stuff that are probably going to agree to our views, and then, you know, just makes us feel happy. And we're like, yeah, we're on the right kind of line.
And you can
thinking.
spiral with it, can't you? You can go down the rabbit hole of that topic from that perspective.
Yeah, exactly. And then, you know, it might actually be, you know, somewhat of a detriment in terms of your thinking about that topic or your understanding of that topic, just because you are forcing yourself to just think about things in a like particular way just by selectively reading those kind of books. That's actually one of the reasons why I started reading The 12 Rules of Life, because like I said, some things I agree with, some things I don't. He comes from a very kind of say Christian perspective in terms of like he takes a lot of reference from the Bible. I haven't finished the book yet, so I don't know if he is actually like Christian still and he still comes from that viewpoint. But I mean, in the book so far, I'm like 3/4 of the way through. There's a lot of references to the Bible and that kind of story thinking and stuff. And I'm a Muslim, so obviously there's some kind of disconnect there. And obviously there is some kind of match because you know, the Abrahamic religions and stuff. So it's quite nice, you know, just learning about that kind of different viewpoint and stuff. And obviously there is some stuff that I just heavily disagree with. And I'm like he's going on about a certain point, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is good. And then he says something like, ruined it. Well, for me. But yeah, the thing is that just reading that kind of stuff where it's different to what you naturally think and stuff is really important, because then that just helps you. It goes back to our kind of thing that we're just trying to get at with everything, is just, you know, understand as much as you can about everything and just kind of create a new understanding of a particular topic or just the world, life in general. So yeah.
Reading, and I think what you're kind of alluding to as well is that reading is supposed to be fun to an extent, but at the same time, it's not just about that. Reading is an opportunity to gain so much more knowledge that, yeah, you have to be prepared to balance that fun element against the element of just committing to something for the sake of getting more knowledge on it. So, yeah, I mean, last year, I didn't really know where to start with books. So I Googled top 100 most influential books of all time, top 10 most influential books of all time. And I saw the books that kept coming up very high up on that list. Some of them were really dense classics, like The Republic, or The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith a few hundred years ago, like The Birth of Economics and stuff. And that sort of book would be insanely dense. So like I tried starting to read The Republic, but going in like little bursts on the tube, it was just a bit like yeah. So I had to find a balance. But that was a lot of those books that I kind of read last year. They weren't purely out of enjoyment. Some of them were for the sake of getting a better understanding of something. I think that's also important.
Yeah, I guess my kind of enjoyment comes from like I like learning. I enjoy learning about anything, so that's why. Yeah, so it is like I take it with the mindset of I'm doing some kind of work that's necessary, but I enjoy it just inherently, just intrinsically enjoy it, and yeah, it's important to kind of keep that in mind, because like the idea of, you know, sometimes it's not going to be so fun, or sometimes you'll just be a bit bored of the book, but sometimes you do just have to push through, because there are some chapters in like every book that I've read that it's like, okay, a bit dead, like at this point, like I wasn't really enjoying it, and my mind was wandering whilst reading it, but I could feel that there was something coming from the book, right? And like if I get like halfway through a book and I'm like still kind of dead, I'm not enjoying it, then I'll just scrap the book. Like at that point, like they've had enough time, they should have got me by now. But yeah, sometimes you do get that odd like chapter or section where you're just like, either you disagree with it heavily and it feels almost like a personal attack, and you're like, wow, screw them, screw this author, screw this book. or sometimes they're just quite mundane and boring. Say if they're giving the context for a particular point, where it's not entirely necessary to know like the history behind it, but it's actual useful information. And then once you actually get to the point they were making, then you're like, oh, okay, now I need that. But it's just that in the mind, like, I guess once you read more and more and you get used to it, you will just kind of start understanding like those kind of techniques that authors use sometimes.
And I think the point of what you're saying, you get halfway through a book and then decide that it's not for you. The point of taking time beforehand to research the book is to eliminate that happening as much as possible. So, for example, the only book that I started reading last year that I didn't finish was the Republic by Plato, and that's just because I didn't fully understand what I was taking on, and I need to read like Homer first, and like if I really want to understand it, and it would just be years of commitment to really get that. And I didn't learn it at school and stuff, but that kind of reinforced the importance to me of, if you are going to learn, if you are going to take on a book that you're not massively passionate about, I think you need to understand what you're in for, because otherwise you won't make the most of it, in my opinion. So yeah.
So with your friend who reads 2 to 3 books a week, what kind of topics does he read about? Wait, let's just do the maths on that. So if he's reading, okay, let's say two books a week. So how many is that in a year?
104.
Four, yeah. Obviously my maths isn't very good. 104 books a year. Damn, that's disgusting. Okay, and let's say an average time of like 10 years written per book. Yeah, like in total, as in like, the collation, like 10 years worth of knowledge in that book. Yeah. So that's thousands. That's like a millennia's worth of information he's going to consume in a year. That's in a year.
Yeah.
10 years? Wow. And it's not exponential. It's disgusting.
It's not just a normal person's knowledge as well. That's an expert in that field.
Yeah, typically, yeah.
Even if you're taking in half of the knowledge, even if you're comprehending half of it, it's just, I don't know, I can't think of many things that compare to that. So that's why, even though I'm not naturally a massive reader, I've kind of had to just make sure that becomes a part of my routine to an extent. I remember earlier, you might want to talk about it now, making a routine out of reading. So now we're in Bournemouth, and I don't have that transport time where I'd usually read. That transport time is really nice, because that's about 40 minutes a day, every day, where I just can read. Now I don't have those 40 minutes, so I have to physically put that into my routine. I have to set aside a bit of time. What I do is, when I wake up in the morning, I read a chapter. I don't have a set number of pages, I just have a chapter that I read. But yeah, you might want to talk about how you can sort of add it into your lifestyle, seeing as you're the lifestyle design dude.
Yeah, I guess to a certain extent. Well, at least I enjoy reading and trying to apply that stuff to my own life. But yeah, when it comes to making a routine out of reading, I was exactly the same. The thing is that, so on my way, like commuting and stuff, so it was usually around, say, 40 minutes one way, 40 minutes back. So I get close to about an hour and a half, and then there's that kind of a bit of dead time before you actually leave, and a bit of dead time when you come back. Like, so yeah, let's say around 2 hours of information consumption time. That was when I was at uni. So, but I would usually listen to like podcasts in that time, and that's at like 2 times speed. I guess the whole like listening to things fast is a whole other topic. Like, I don't know, a lot of people I've spoken to about, I consume everything at like minimum 2 times speed, depending on the person. But
big brain.
Yeah, but the thing is, you're consuming twice the amount of information, right? It's all about that. But okay, yeah, it does have some of its drawbacks, and sometimes I do watch things or listen to things at 1 times or 1.5.
But you do get used to it, don't you?
You get used to it very quick. Yeah. But anyway, that was a bit of a side point. But yeah, basically, my routine was, whilst I'm traveling to uni and back, or to Tesco, like to get groceries and stuff, or whilst I'm doing my groceries, I'd have a podcast in, right, or like a lecture of some kind, depending on what I was feeling. So that would be my time. And then yeah, like you were saying, now that I'm back home and chilling without any kind of solid routine, and now there's lockdown as well, we can't really travel around, so I don't have that excuse to consume that kind of information. So then it's difficult to kind of put it into routine where you don't just sit for like 10 hours and just consume information for like the rest of the day, but then also get things, just your normal day-to-day life stuff done. So the way, when I basically coming back to the main point, when I came back home, I stopped listening to podcasts, and I was just, and then like 3 weeks in, I was like, I'm just always kind of bored. I'm not like learning new stuff. And I was like, oh, that's why, because I'm just not listening or reading or consuming anything that was like new. So yeah, and then I decided to take on reading. I've now kind of forced podcasts back into my life when I'm doing more mundane stuff. But yeah, when it comes to reading, I just kind of force myself every morning, 1 hour, just 1 hour in the morning. That's the one thing I do not miss. I will miss. I will like flop the rest of the day. But if I get that 1 hour reading in the morning, or just 1 hour reading, then it's like I'm Gucci, bro. Like I don't care. So yeah, I've put quite a lot of importance onto it, and the reason I've done that, and just that is like the priority of my day. I hate the word priorities because by definition you cannot have multiple priorities. But yeah, my priority of the day is to get that reading done. And what I'm hoping is that if I formulate it into just to become like a pure habit, even when I don't really feel like reading, I just formulate it into a habit. Now, when I go back to uni and have some like dead time and I can just sit down, I can just get into the flow of reading a lot quicker, because I've even noticed that my reading speed has increased. My ability to just get into the book has increased a lot. Sometimes it take me like 20 minutes before I'd like, oh okay, yeah, and then I'm actually reading properly. But now it's like within 5 minutes I'm like into the book and just zooming through it as fast as I can, being a dyslexic person. But
you can train it, can't you?
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can really train it. When I first was reading, I didn't really know how to read or how to make the most of it, but now I think I'm getting better at making the most of the reading process. 15 minutes now reading, I think will do a lot better for me than 15 minutes used to a year ago. Just in the way you train your focus, the comprehension of the words, and yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and comprehension actually. So going back to the Kindle thing we were talking about earlier, and why we just feel like, well, at least I feel that it's superior to read, or superior, but it's nicer to read in a book. But logically, and like the amount of utility you get out of reading on like an electronic reader is more, because one thing was when like you don't understand a word, or you don't know what it means, or you don't quite know what it means in this context, or you've heard that word before but you've just kind of understood it. I'm sure you know what I mean, where it's like someone, like you come across a word a few times, you don't actually know what it means, but you know what it means just through the
context.
It in context. Yeah, so you're like, oh, it kind of means this. But then on the Kindle, and sometimes when like one thing that kind of deterred me from reading books when I was like a few years ago or whatever, I'd be reading something and then my vocab isn't particularly good, and if you're trying to read something from someone that's seemingly like somewhat intelligent, they're going to use a word that you don't understand probably quite a lot, and I would just have to go to the dictionary, and then sometimes like that word would come again, and then I forgot what it meant from yesterday, and I'm like, oh, man, I need to like find what that word is, or like you Google it or whatever, and Kindle just highlight that word, and it's like it just comes up with the definition, like all the definitions, even translations if you want the translations, and that's been massive. And in fact, I actually highlight things with #V for vocab to add it to my vocab list. Vocab list sounds like GCSE like language learning, but just in general, just to kind of expand my vocab and help articulate certain ideas better.
There's one thing that really triggers me with using Kindle. I don't know if you know how to fix it, but it's bothered me a couple of times. It's ruined the ending of a book. Sometimes at the end of a book you've got or at the end of a Kindle book you've got a lot of advertisements for a few pages, or you have an index section and stuff at the end. It will say you're 83% of the way through the book, but then you're actually at the end, and I'm not mentally prepared. I love the feeling of reading the last few pages and I know that everything's being wrapped up. Yeah, that's happened 2 or 3 times where I've been reading a really good book and then suddenly the ending is struck upon me and I wasn't mentally ready. So I don't know if you know a way to stop that. I mean, yeah, I like when I'm reading a normal book, I can see kind of, with the pages, I can see how far I am through it.
Yeah, I have
that exact thing.
No, it's a huge thing. I hate it. It does actually drive me nuts a bit. But so what I do, so I used to read by percentage of the book. Like I'd read 10% a day in the morning. So like before I was saying, now I read 1 hour. I just set it to a time, because sometimes 10%, if it's a big book, or if it's a book that I'm just reading slow because it's hard to understand, then it would just take me like 3 hours to read that 10%. So that's why I changed to an hour. But yeah, I used to read just 10% of a book like every morning. And then it'd be like 70%, and it's like 73%, and you're done. And I'm like, because the last quarter of the book is just references. So I just changed it to show the page number, and then like before I start the book, I check how many pages are actually in the book, right? To see like when it would end. Like it might say like 500 pages in the book, but the book actually ends at like page 410 or something. So I just keep that in mind, and then I'm looking at the pages. So I go more by page numbers now.
It happened at the end of Guns, Germs and Steel.
Oh no.
I was gutted. There's like a second section at the end of it that's fairly long, but yeah, I just suddenly stumbled upon the end of it. I was really into it, and then it just suddenly finished. I was gutted. And that's just that does sound like the best solution though, just looking to the end and seeing on that like 9 panel view. Going like scrolling across the bottom slider to the end and seeing how many. Okay, I'll start doing that when I have my books.
It's quite annoying. Like, surely there should just be an option where you can just set the end of the page, or there's so much metadata within the book. Surely they can just, because when you open a new Kindle book, it starts on like, it doesn't start on the very first page.
No.
It automatically opens to the first page of the first chapter, or like, the acknowledgements at the beginning or something.
Yeah, it must be programmed.
Yeah, it's all within the metadata. Why can't they just set it like...
That
surely
percentage
it's not
thing.
difficult to just...
It spun me first time.
Yeah.
It spun me. I was like, hold on. I thought the percentage...
Oh man, that's...
Maybe we can contact Jeff Bezos. And,
yeah, like, come on, bro. Use some of your 150 billion net worth to... But, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm thinking about sort of what else we need to add before. This is our first recording.
Yeah,
it may not end up being our first episode. So
it's our first recording, so you have that. Yeah,
we're just letting you into a little secret.
Yeah, I don't think we covered the actual routine thing properly, did we?
Just, I guess everyone has to implement it and fit it into their routine and figure out a way that.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to mention, I think doing it at the beginning of the day is best, because it's like reading. It doesn't require a lot of energy. You can kind of doze your way, like half sleep through a book. Obviously, it's probably not the best way, and you might miss a lot in terms of comprehension. And you might realize that later on. You're like, oh, I basically didn't actually pay attention to this entire chapter. But in the morning, like if you are, say, slightly tired or something, it's still easy enough to just sit down and read a book to a certain extent. Or at least I find it quite cozy, at least in the summer, where it's like, it's sunny quite early. So you get up, just sit in the sun somewhere if you can, and then have a cup of coffee and slowly work your way through a book for an hour. And it's a
nice way to wake up.
Yeah, it's a very peaceful way to just start your day. It depends on what you're reading, I guess, but yeah.
I have two different approaches to it personally. If I have the choice, I think, I guess it doesn't matter that much, but if I'm reading a non-fiction book, I prefer to read it in the morning. I think you have to be actively taking in the information a lot more. But I also like reading before going to bed sometimes. In fact, sometimes it helps me go to sleep, especially if it's a physical book. I don't know, you switch off your phone for half an hour, 40 minutes, you just read a book and it kind of helps you go to sleep, especially if it's a fiction book where it's sort of, I don't know, you don't have to be taking in the information in the same way. You're not taking in dates and names and events in the same way. So, I don't know. I personally prefer reading fiction books in the evening.
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I don't read fiction books really. Just because there's a lot I want to read that are non-fiction. But yeah, I do agree with that. I have tried reading some, like sometimes I do I read in the morning and like before bed. But yeah, reading before bed, it knocks me out instantly. I'll sit there an hour before like I plan on going to bed, sit down and then start reading. I'll just knock out instantly, like within like 15 minutes.
It's what I do before any exam. There are books that I use where I've just read the first chapter, like because it just helps me go to sleep. One was I think it's The Doors to Perception by Huxley, and it looks like a really good book, a really interesting book. But I just borrow it from my flat. I borrowed it from my flatmate before exams. So I was like, can I just grab that book again? And it would just send me to sleep. So I do think it's a good way to go to sleep. Before an exam, I think that's a good tip.
Yeah, because the most important thing before an exam is sleep.
And it distracts you from thinking about it when you're lying in bed.
Yeah, just don't read your textbook.
No, that's not the right book.
Start reading Grey's Anatomy before but yeah. So with the kind of books I read, I need to pay a certain amount of attention. Usually, when I wake up, I can get into it quite quickly. So that's why I'd like reading in the morning, and then it gets out the way, because I find this with all the important things I like putting at the beginning of my day. I guess this is kind of going into like a habit formation, lifestyle design thing, but it does apply a lot to reading because it's just forming a habit. Doing things at the beginning of the day, you're more likely to actually get it done. At least for me, and I think for the majority of people, they are more likely to just get things done in the day. Or, all of those highly productive people, they're always waking up at like 5 a.m., 4 a.m. and stuff. It's not necessary to wake up that early all the time, but as in, I think it's good, and I like doing it myself. But the reason for it is just because it's that quiet time where you have no distractions. I won't get into the whole dopamine thing and how that kind of gets reset with sleep and then goes on throughout the day when interaction with other people, your phone or notifications and stuff just makes it harder to then focus on new things. So I won't get into that. That's like an entire episode of its own. But reading in the morning, it just leaves you more inclined to do it, because if you do it later on, you're probably more likely to have excuses. If you've read however much you want to read, or do whatever, like just tasks in general, habits that you're trying to form in general, if you do them before anyone's even awake, or before you've started anything else, like just wake up an hour earlier, go to sleep an hour earlier, just create that slight shift. But doing it in the morning, if you like, that's why I always do my exercise at the beginning of the day, because when it's like later on in the day, then I'll be like, oh man, let me just finish this task that I'm doing, and then it's like, and then I eat. But it's like, I've just eaten. Now I can't. I have to wait like 2 hours until I can exercise, and then then I'll be in the middle of something else, and then we're like, I'm feeling kind of tired now. It's like 6 p.m. I don't want to exercise. I'll just do it tomorrow. You just ruined it. Like,
I think it definitely fosters a productive mindset, no doubt. If you do that in the morning routinely, exercising, reading in the morning as soon as you wake up, as you said, you're not going to go. You'll be a lot better at the science than I am, but yeah, just starting off with that mindset of being productive, just getting into a good, getting some good momentum. Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I want to touch upon, it kind of goes back to the whole forming the habit of reading. I think one thing that deters a lot of people, or like demotivates a lot of people from reading, is just like what we were kind of getting at with the reading speed, and then how much time they can dedicate and stuff. Because I mean, I'm dyslexic. I struggle to read. I'm like 4th percentile in my reading speed. I'm absolutely terrible. I've sped up though, just through the habit and stuff. But yeah, I was reading, I think it was an article, like a newsletter or blog post or something by James Clear, who wrote Atomic Habits, like, best-selling habit formation book. I haven't actually read it myself, but I follow him and stuff. So yeah, I read a thing where he was talking about forming a habit for reading, and he was like, yeah, just read 20 pages in the morning every day. And I agree with that. I think that's a good amount to read it, like just to get into the habit, because 20 pages isn't that much. And it's not like you're trying to complete, because a lot of people are like, okay, I'll read 1 chapter a day. Some chapters are smaller, some chapters are really long, and then you can just get demotivated by that massive variation. But 20 pages, no matter what, it's like consistent. And then it was like, and it only takes most people half an hour. And I was like, oh, it doesn't take me half an hour to read 20 pages. It takes me an hour. Like after I read that, I checked the next day, and I usually time myself an hour, but then I looked at the page number, counted that, it was like 20 pages in exactly an hour. After like 2 weeks, or like, I don't know, I can't remember the timing, but I'm now at like 30 pages in an hour, so I have improved. And, my comprehension has kind of stayed the same. I've applied different techniques to kind of help me increase like my reading speed. I think we kind of alluded to it earlier when we were talking about the Kindle and stuff, that you can, well, no, we didn't talk about that, but basically it's kind of like a speed reading technique where, on the Kindle at least, you can shorten how long the lines are,
modifying spacing, and
yeah, exactly. So your eyes don't have to track as far, and you're less likely to line drift, and then have to reread, and then just kind of forcing yourself to kind of read at slightly faster than comprehension, like say 90% comprehension, just by almost skimming it and trying to move, like look at the middle of the line and read the edges of the lines with your peripheral vision and stuff, so your eyes don't have to move so much, so there's less chance for error of like line tracking. And then if you keep the slightly faster than comprehension for like say 10 minutes or something, you'll actually start comprehending at 100%, and then you can speed up a tiny bit more. So as through my 1 hour of reading, I do speed up like as I kind of go through it, because obviously it just takes a little bit to get into it.
It's like a gym workout.
Yeah, exactly.
You're doing arms, you're doing
it's
back.
like, man, my like those rectus muscles are doing bits right now. But so don't get too kind of like demotivated by like, oh man, it just took me so long to read a book, and you just want to finish the book. You'll speed up with time, and as you read more, and like over the year, you'll probably just slowly increase in your reading speed as it becomes a habit, right? You'll improve very quickly at the beginning, just like with anything. But then once you hit that plateau, yeah, it will slow down, but you'll probably reach quite a nice reading speed where you can actually complete books quite quickly. My current target is to read a book a week. Obviously, it depends on the size of the book. If I know it's proportionally bigger than most books that I read, then I'll give it like 10 days or.
Are you going to try and maintain that in London?
Yeah, but the thing is, I'm already struggling with 10 books, with a book a week. So I've changed it to a book in 10 days, and a book every 2 weeks is the lowest that I'm going to go with in uni.
I'm not as adventurous as you. I'm always nowadays at 1 a month. So
yeah, and to be fair, that's like still an insane amount. That like 12 a year is better than like 1 or like 0 in an entire year. So there's still a lot to like gain from it, but yeah, with reading speed, it will come with time. There are loads of different tactics you can use to try and improve it, and you'll get better over time. But don't let that be a demotivating factor in terms of reading, because I know it was for me. And when I kind of put that habit in, when I kind of made that deal with myself, okay, yeah, I'm going to read this much now, and like make a habit of reading. like just a few months ago, man, at the beginning I was so demotivated. Like it was so hard because I knew like I'm not a good reader. Just I struggle to read. It's like it requires a lot of brain power for me to read, even if it's like a simple, say, fiction book or something. Like it just like I can't read words very well. But once you get used to it, like even me, like I've improved in my speed. So if I can do it, like most people probably can. And with that, Dan, do you have anything else you want to say?
I do. I've got one more thing I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
It's do you have a top 3 favorite books of all time? I quite like ranking things.
Ooh.
So I was just, as you were finishing there, I was thinking, what are my top 3 favorite books? And also I had one more sentence that I was going to say just in my thoughts on reading, which is what we were saying earlier, is what I think the most important thing with reading is in starting a new routine with it is choose the books wisely. That's all I would say. Choose the books wisely because you're only going to be able to read an X number of books in your life. And yeah, you might as well choose the ones that you think you'll gain the most from. And that changes for everyone, obviously. But yeah, that's something I think is quite helpful. And I do think I have my top 3. If that gives you more time, I can...
I haven't read enough books to give myself like if someone's only read 3 books, obviously that's going to be their top 3. But as in I've read more than 3, but like I haven't read enough to.
Do you have a favorite? Do you have a favorite?
It depends, like what kind of topic, or just favorite book overall, no matter what.
I mean, I guess it depends on your criteria. Either the book that gave you the most enjoyment while reading, or the book you think you learned the most from and was most influential in your mindset.
Yeah, that would probably be the category I'll go for, the latter one you mentioned. But yeah, I'm gonna have to pass. Maybe in a future episode I'll come out with my top. After a year, once I've read for a year, like consistently, solidly, and I've reached my quota of how many books was it? Like 30 to 40 books in a year. Then I'll give my.
I'll be looking forward to your top 20 then.
Oh, right.
The guy in my year that I was talking about, every year the review of his top 10, top 20, and I think it goes up to top 50.
Oh, wow.
It's really interesting. And he gives a review of each book and his overall thoughts on it. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, but, I think giving creating a summary of a book, even if it's just for yourself, just helps you condense the key of like the essence of that book. Really
I love doing that. I love rating each book I've read, and I just like ranking everything. I don't know why. So
I mean, ranks are nice. It gives order out of all the chaos that we have in the world.
Okay. Can I say my favorite one very quickly?
Just before you were talking about the trying to you were emphasizing the point of finding a good book. One kind of thing that I like to go with is if there's someone you trust that recommended a book. If anyone recommends a book, it's usually probably because it impacted them in some kind of significant way. So that's usually a good starting point. It's hard to sometimes just go and look at books like in general. Obviously, you can look at the big classics and they are generally good books.
The lists of top 50 of all time.
Yeah, exactly. But don't take people's recommendations lightly, particularly like if you trust them or, you have similar thoughts, or maybe if you have opposing thoughts, right? Maybe they thought it was good because it kind of supported their views and ideas. And that could be of even more benefit to you. But yeah, go ahead with your top 3.
Oh, thank you. I was thinking that could be my sort of recommendations for the listeners if they're looking for any books that they're interested in reading. They're not groundbreaking. They're really popular books, so they're not niche at all. I think I would go 1984 by George Orwell. I think that's a book that everyone should read. I would describe these as sort of books that no matter who you are, it's worth reading. 1984 by George Orwell. Guns, Germs and Steel. The book recently by Harari, Sapiens.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the generation before, but it's really good, and I really like the author. I think he's really interesting, and I like that book a lot. So I'd recommend that book as well. And then the last one I'd recommend, and it's my favorite book that I've ever read, is Crime and Punishment.
So Crime and Punishment is your first?
Yes.
Oh, you went in reverse order. Okay,
yes, I think 3, 2, 1. Yeah, Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. Really, really, really beautiful book. So
give like a quick 1 minute snippet or like summary.
Snippet.
Not snippet.
Okay, page 81.
Summary is
it's quite a dense book. It's about, I don't want to ruin it. It's about, it's based in Russia.
Is it fiction?
Yeah, it's a fictional book.
Oh, okay.
It's it's a classic from Russia, and it's a young man who commits a crime.
And he's punished?
And it takes you through the ultimate punishment of committing that crime. And the reason why I really loved it is because it made sense to me. It was one of the first books that I read that really made sense, in that the author goes on like philosophical rants about a very small matter in the book, he expands into that, and he goes into the most interesting rants that are not to do with the plot necessarily, but do tie into it, like about the essence of a good person or the essence of being a bad person, or are some people more entitled than other people just by nature of their personality. And yeah, it goes through the mental process of good and bad and what that means, and it's just such a journey. It's really beautiful. So I really love that book. So that's my final thoughts. Okay,
all right, I'll note that down. I'll read that pretty soon then.
Get that audio book.
Yeah, because that would actually be the first fiction book I read. I haven't read a fiction book since like year 7 or something. So yeah, interesting.
I was recommended that book by a friend. So there you go. Back to what you were saying. But anyway, yeah, thanks for sitting with me for the last however long and discussing books. I guess we've both still got a lot to learn about that. We're not experts by any means, but yeah, it's something we should all do.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess we'll just leave it at that, because we'll just kind of talk forever about the topic, and we'll probably continue to talk after we stop recording. So
we'll turn off the mics. So you get that smoothie going, and then
we'll leave it at that then. All right. Peace. Thank you for listening to this episode of Getting It.
If you enjoyed this episode,
or didn't,
then feel free to leave us a rating and review on the Apple Podcasts app or on the Apple Podcasts website.
We'd love to hear your thoughts, ideas, or questions about anything we discussed, so feel free to email us at thoughts@gettingit.co.uk.
You can also reach us on Twitter or Instagram at gettingit_pod.
You can find all the links in the show notes.